Five places abandoned after disasters. Number 5. Times Beach, Missouri, USA. In the early 1970s, the town of Times Beach in Missouri was plagued with a problem. As most of its roads were unpaved, cars and pedestrians would kick up quantities of dust, causing a massive safety issue for anyone traveling along them. So in order to prevent this, the town hired a waste hauler called Russell Bliss to oil the roads, a role he carried out between 1972 and 1976. At the same time, however, Bliss was also contracted by another company, ICP, to dispose of toxic waste produced by Northeastern Pharmaceutical and Chemical Company, NEPACO. During the Vietnam War, NEPACO was one of the government's suppliers of the infamous Agent Orange, a defoliant which contained the dioxin, TCDD. Like all dioxins, TCDD can cause immune and reproductive disorders, alongside other conditions such as cancer and chloroquine, a severe acne-like condition which can last for decades. Unbeknownst to everyone, Bliss had been oiling the roads of Times Beach with a mixture containing used engine oil and the NEPACO waste. On December 3, 1982, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, took samples of the town's soil. The result? It was contaminated with levels of dioxin 100 times higher than the level considered hazardous to human health. Unfortunately, before any action could be taken, the nearby Merrimack River overflowed on December 5 and flooded the town, spreading the contaminant throughout the whole city. Eventually, the floodwaters receded and in 1983, the EPA evicted the town's population and reclaimed the land, a buyout which cost a reported $32 million. By 1985, the town had been bulldozed and all the soil incinerated in specially built mobile furnaces. Today, the area on which the town stood is now a state park. As for the dioxins, the EPA revisited the site in 2012 and tested the soil again, eventually concluding that there was no longer any health risk associated with the site. Number 4. Wynnum, Australia. The town of Wynnum in Western Australia was originally established in 1947 to provide accommodation for workers at the nearby chrysotillite mine. But as time went on, the town grew in size. In 1951, it had a population of 500, and prior to its abandonment in 1966, it was home to over 20,000 people. Throughout much of the time that the mine was operating, concerns were constantly raised by health specialists about the effects of the asbestos on the townspeople. But these were ignored by the mine's owners. The mine finally closed in 1966 and, at nearly the same time, several air surveys revealed that asbestos particles were present in every building of the town. Action was finally taken in 1979 when the government began winding down Wynnum by offering to buy residents' houses and pay for their relocation costs. Many took this offer, and left their homes to be demolished. But a small number defied this situation, and were still resident in the town as of 2006 despite the official removal of the town's status, its removal from all road signs, and its disconnection from the country's main electric grid. A conservative estimate of the casualties suggests that of the 20,000 who lived in Wynnum, over 2,000 have since died from asbestos-related illnesses. As well as this, Western Australia suffers from one of the highest rates per capita of malignant mesothelioma in the world. Number 3. Deception Island, Antarctica. Deception Island is located 75 miles north of Antarctica, inside the cluster of islands known as the South Shetland Islands. It was first founded in the early 19th century by a British naval expedition, and it played host to a thriving early 20th century industry of whaling. By 1914, there were 14 whale blubber processing plants on the island, owned by a variety of nations, including Chile and Norway. But after the Great Depression caused the whaling plants to become unprofitable, they were eventually abandoned. The British established a permanent scientific base on the islands in 1944, and Chile did the same 10 years later. but volcanic eruptions on the island in 1967, 1968, and 1969 forced the British to abandon the island entirely, leaving behind derelict fueling stations and huts. Although they somehow survived the eruptions of 1967 and 1968, the 1969 eruption also caused the destruction of 2 Chilean bases, a loss which led their scientists to abandon the island as well. The island currently has no permanent residents, but like Chernobyl, it plays host to a thriving tourist trade. The variety of industries that once occupied the island have left behind a wealth of ruined buildings and equipment for tourists to explore, including fueling stations and pumps, huts, scientific research stations, and an aircraft hangar. Number 2. Wynnum, China. On May 12, 2008, an earthquake with a magnitude of 8.0 hit the Sichuan province of China, killing more than 69,000 people and injuring another 374,000. It also left between 5 and 11 million people homeless, a high proportion of the 15 million people that lived in the affected area. One of the worst hit towns was the town of Beidou, in the north of the province. Of all the buildings that stood there, over 80% collapsed during the quake. Thoughtfully, the government elected not to demolish the ruins of Beidou, and instead decided to preserve the town as a museum. Collapsed buildings were supported with specially installed hydraulics to prevent their further collapse, effectively freezing the site in a state caused by the earthquake. Number 1. Saint Jean Vienne, Quebec, Canada. Unusually, there is little information about the disaster that devastated the tiny village of Saint Jean Vienne in Quebec on May 4, 1971. What is known tells us that following a period of extremely heavy rain, the notoriously unstable Leda clay upon which the town had been built liquefied and collapsed. This created a 30-meter-high abyss, which consumed as many as 40 houses. Prior to this cataclysm, the townspeople reported a number of strange occurrences. The foundations of several houses sank 6 to 8 inches into the soil, large cracks appeared in streets and driveways, and people reported hearing heavy thumping noises, as well as the sound of running water, coming from underground. Nevertheless, in the 5 minutes that it took for this landslide to occur, 31 people were killed, a figure which would have been much higher if it had happened later at night. Unsurprisingly, the village was later abandoned by the remaining residents, who were rehoused in the nearby city of Arvida.